Unit 1. The Gifts of Youth.
Panel discussion. In this panel discussion, 4 teenagers from different countries are talking about topics important to them. Let's listen to their different points of view.
Well, it seems to me many teens, including myself, are much less interested in politics than they should be. They assume politics is an adult issue. We should recognise that in the near future this issue will become ours. Why not get involved in important matters that have a direct link to our present and future? I believe we have to be active citizens, take initiatives and make our voices heard. We should be fully responsible for shaping our own future. Let's not have others decide for us.
As far as I'm concerned, family should matter to adolescents more than any other thing. Family helps adolescents adopt positive values and develop healthy emotional and physical behaviors. I mean, teens who don't have good communication with their families or don't feel supported by their parents are more likely to have problems in school, use drugs and alcohol, and have trouble with the law. Unfortunately, family is losing the weight it once had.
Of course, my own looks are important to me. That's why I'm concerned with fashion, new styles, and so on. To my mind, adolescents should take care of their appearances because I think a person's outward appearance reflects the sort of person he or she is. Believe it or not, I spend about 30 minutes on myself, my makeup, my clothes, and my hair before I leave home. You may think I'm sort of obsessed with looking glamorous, but I can't imagine how you can impress others if your appearance isn't more than super.
What matters to me most is study. My point of view is that adolescents should concentrate more on their studies. This way, they would determine for themselves their own future status. It's through studying hard and being alert to distractors, such as too much leisure or careless friends, that you can achieve all that you dream of. Remember, success in life depends on how much you are focused on your schoolwork.
Unit 2. Humour.
Hi, everybody out there. Welcome to a new edition of Meet a Star on Omega 2 Radio Channel. Our guest today is the retired humorist Joanne Thompson. Nice to have you with us, Joanne. My first question would be, I guess a good sense of humor is essential to be a successful stand-up comedian. Is that so?
Yeah, you gotta have a pretty good sense of humor, but it's only one part of making people laugh. It's really tough to get on a stage in front of an audience and do stand-up comedy. To do any kind of live performance, you need to have a strong ego and nerves of steel. Almost everybody gets stage fright the first time they perform a comic show.
I am not sure I got your point. Would you clarify that, please?
I want to say people think stand-up comics do nothing but tell little stories and jokes to others. It's a lot tougher than that. Stand-up comics spend hours every day practicing and perfecting their shows. And they have to know their audience and the kind of humor they'll respond to.
Do you mean stand-up comics prepare their acts beforehand rather than improvise them?
That's exactly what I mean. You have to figure out what you're going to say before you get on stage. The audience may find it amusing when you're stuck, but preparation is really important. Even great comics write down their shows first. They have their acts all planned out, then they improvise around them.
Comedians need other things to perform well, don't they?
Certainly. Reading and watching the most outstanding comedians are also necessary ingredients. These give the comedian a wide range of comic words and tricks. The idea isn't to copy others, but it helps comedians gain new wits and moves. Look, Comedians lose their charm if they stick to a certain style for a long time.
I can't understand why there aren't many famous female stand-up comedians.
Well, let's not make a gender issue out of it. But I think it's a question of personal tendency and career choice. It's not at all a question of ability or talent.
Thanks a lot, Joanne.
Thank you. Unit 3, Education for All, Education from All.
Zheng Shengzhang is chairman of UNESCO's executive board. He is also Vice Minister of Education, People's Republic of China. Welcome, Mr. Chairman. My first question is about adult illiteracy in China. The number of illiterate adults in China has decreased by over 140 million in the past 25 years. What is your secret for this success?
Thank you for inviting me to this interview. Okay, in China we have been making great strides since 1978, and into 21st century we are reducing illiteracy at a rate of 2 million people per year. Our recipe is simple. Our government places a high priority on two tasks: eliminating illiteracy and providing 9 years of compulsory education for all. Our government enables people to see the benefits of literacy by linking it to family life, agricultural production, economic development, and indigenous traditions. We also encourage women's literacy because if a woman becomes literate, the whole family benefits.
Education for rural people was high on the agenda of the 5th High-Level Group on Education for All held in Beijing last November. Why is this issue so important to China?
Unlike in Paris, Shanghai or Beijing, the natural conditions in much of western rural area of China are harsh. Much of the western part of our country is vast and lightly populated. This means that we need to double our efforts and our investments in order to achieve the same results. Other countries, especially those in South Africa, can relate to these challenges. Political will is key to finding a solution. We have a coordinating mechanism in which leadership and accountability are shared at the central, provincial, municipal levels, according to the strength of each ministry and agency.
What is at the top of your agenda as chairman of UNESCO's executive board?
Well, we need to focus on UNESCO's strengths in education, science and culture. UNESCO's 60th anniversary is a milestone. We must fulfill the organization's mandate by contributing to peace and prosperity. But there are new challenges too. HIV and AIDS, SARS, avian flu, sustainable development and terrorism. I have a very good board in terms of its experience, diversity, knowledge and willingness to contribute. Reaching our goals will be a collective effort.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Unit 4, Sustainable Development.
Could you please tell us what you mean by rural-urban linkage?
Well, rural-urban linkage generally refers to the growing mobility of people, services and goods between city and countryside. This refers to people migrating or commuting and exchange of goods between the two areas.
Well, what are the benefits of this approach?
Of course, the approach has many benefits. Various countries and regions adopt the urban-rural linkage approach as a strategy for achieving faster development. For example, a development action in both areas plays a positive role in decreasing poverty. It also creates employment and develops income. Adequate investments certainly improve rural productivity. Moreover, It allows access to markets, jobs, and public services.
How can Morocco implement this approach?
A good question, in fact. First, we need to evaluate and understand the relationships between urban and rural areas in Morocco. Second, adequate infrastructure such as transportation, communication, energy, and basic services should be developed to facilitate mobility. Third, the government should recognize the potentials of rural-urban development at all levels, national, regional, and local. Both areas hold many capacities that are inactive. Efforts should be made to benefit from these capacities in the development process of both areas.
Can you tell me, what are the drawbacks of urbanizing rural areas?
Well, some people don't think that there are drawbacks. I personally think that urbanizing rural areas is not all positive. Cities and their metropolitan extensions absorb productive agricultural land, exploit water resources, and pollute the rural environment. Besides, cities rarely expand and build up effectively.
Unit 5. Women at the Top.
How did you decide to write Local Prism?
The idea came from several developments and observations. The first was Morocco's changing media landscape in the mid-1990s. Before I left for the United States to start my PhD, I noticed new press freedom in Morocco. There seemed to be a new era of journalism, resulting in new Moroccan women's publications addressing topics with freedom and audacity. This relates to another point, the impact of globalization on local cultures and gender roles. In the mid to late 1990s, globalization was a buzzword. There was and still is a fear of losing local traditions to global influence.
Whom does your book target?
It's for people interested in the gender and cultural dimensions of globalization. It addresses the production and consumption of women's magazines and analyzes the context in which they emerged, including changes in Morocco since the mid-1980s. The book explains the evolution of Morocco women's journalism and compares women's magazines.
Moroccan women's magazines are criticized for being elitist and focusing on urban issues. How did you reach rural women since your research focused on those magazines?
Magazines where female illiteracy is high cannot be anything but elitist. This doesn't mean we should ignore what the elite are reading and producing. Magazine use in Morocco is interesting. While illiteracy prevents many women from reading the magazines, they still look at the images. Women use the magazines, pictures, as resources for dressmaking. Many can neither read nor buy the magazines. Instead, they borrow copies and have friends explain the stories.
You've noticed a gender dimension in Moroccan poverty. What is it?
Poverty is experienced differently by both sexes. It is not just about income. Poverty has multi-dimensional levels. There is poverty of resources and opportunities. There are laws that do not protect women, and poverty that results from their lack of education, employment, and health services. Morocco is on the right track. For example, Morocco's Mudwana, girls' education, and training programs are laudable. Women's increased political participation is putting women's issues on the national agenda. But the challenge is daunting. The situation of rural women is still precarious because of marginalization.
Why don't you tell us about your American journey now?
I came to the United States after 15 years of teaching in Morocco. I wanted to gain skills to take back to Morocco. I did my PhD at Pennsylvania State University, where I met my husband. I then returned to teaching in Morocco because my Fulbright scholarship required I serve my country for 2 years. In 2003, I joined my husband in Washington, and started teaching at the American University School of International Service. I now have 2-year-old twin boys, Adam and Zachary. I spend my days balancing my personal and my professional life.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Scally.
Unit 6, Cultural Values.
Well, let's start by a brief definition of culture shock. We can define it as the physical and emotional discomfort one suffers when coming to live in another country or a place different from the place of origin. This term expresses the lack of direction, the feeling of not knowing what to do or how to do things in a new environment, and not knowing what is appropriate or inappropriate. Living in a new country can be hard, but sometimes you just have to adjust to difficult situations. Generally speaking, we could say that there are 4 stages to culture shock. First of all, the discovery stage. To the visitor, everything seems new and unusual. The food, the surroundings, the buildings. And it produces a feeling of excitement to be in the new environment, a desire to look around, to experiment, to explore the new culture. In this stage, the individual feels involved in some kind of fantastic adventure. The second stage is the rejection or resistance stage, when the newness wears off and the visitor sees the country from a different light, and often begins to criticize the country, the life, and the values of the people. This period of culture shock can be very difficult and lead the individual to reject or pull away from the new culture. The third stage, we could say, is called the immersion stage. This is when the individual establishes a courageous connection with the new environment as he begins to realize that things are not so bad in the host culture. The things around him become more familiar. He therefore gains more self-confidence and usually becomes stronger because he can take care of himself in the new place. Things are still difficult, but the individual feels he can survive. And the final stage, we could say, is the adjustment or adaptation stage, when the individual adapts to conditions in the host country and becomes used to the new situation. He becomes more comfortable. He begins to feel at home and enjoy living in the foreign country. He feels very much at ease indeed.
Unit 8, International Organizations.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Today I want to talk to you about the lessons which I learned in the 10 years during which I had the difficult job of the Secretary General. You will see that every one of my 5 lessons brings me to the conclusion that leadership is no less needed now than it was 60 years ago. My first lesson is that in today's world, security of every one of us is linked to that of everyone else. Security for some could never come to be achieved at the expense of insecurity for others. Security must be collective and indivisible. And I would add that this responsibility is not simply a matter of states being ready to come to each other's aid when attacked. It also includes our shared responsibility to protect populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. My second lesson is that we are not only responsible for each other's security, but we are also responsible for each other's welfare. Global solidarity is both necessary and possible. It is necessary because without solidarity, no society can be truly stable, and no one's prosperity truly secure. It is not realistic to think that some people can go on deriving great benefits from globalization, while billions of their fellow human beings are left in abject poverty, or even thrown into it. We have to give our fellow citizens, not only within each nation, but in the global community, at least a chance to share in our prosperity. My third lesson is that development depends on respect for human rights and the rule of law. Our world continues to be divided, not only by economic differences, but also by religion and culture. That is not in itself a problem. Throughout history, human life has been enriched by diversity and different communities have learned from each other. But if our different communities are to live together in peace, we must stress also what unites us, our common humanity, and our shared belief that human dignity and rights should be protected by law. My fourth lesson, closely related to the last one, is that governments must be accountable for their actions in the international arena as well as in the domestic one. Today, the actions of one state can often have a decisive effect on the lives of people in other states. So, powerful states have a special responsibility to take account of global views and interests as well as national ones. And today, they need to take into account also the views of what we call non-state actors. I mean, commercial corporations, charities and pressure groups, labor unions, philanthropic foundations, universities, all the myriad forms in which people come together voluntarily to think about or to try to change the world. My fifth and final lesson derives certainly from those other four. We can only do all these things by working together through a multilateral system and by making the best possible use of the unique instrument we have, namely the United Nations. My friends, we have achieved much since 1945, when the United Nations was established, but much remains to be done to put those 5 principles into practice. Thank you very much.
Unit 9, Science and Technology.
Give me a simple life. Give me a simple life with a book by the fire, a stool to rest my feet on, and a cushion for my head. Free from mobiles, emails, iPods, phones, computers, cars, pollution, hospitals, work or job centers, motorbikes or cars with screaming sirens. Give me a simple life with a book by the fire, a stool to rest my feet on, and a cushion for my head. Don't throw at me self-assembly kits where I have to hunt for all the bits. Don't tell me I can order online or phone 0870 and wait in a queue. Give me a simple life with a book by the fire, a stool to rest my head on, and a cushion for my head.
Unit 10, Brain Drain.
Do skilled Africans have the moral obligation to remain and work in Africa?
I believe those with skills should be encouraged and rewarded to stay, work, and raise their families in Africa. When that happens, a large middle class will be created. Then, a true renaissance will occur.
Should skilled African immigrants be required to return to Africa?
I believe controlling immigration will be very difficult. Instead, I recommend the United Nations impose a brain gain tax upon those nations benefiting from the brain drain.
I wonder, is brain drain a form of modern slavery?
By the end of the 21st century, people will have different sensibilities and will describe it as modern-day slavery. In the 19th century, which was an agricultural age, the US economy needed strong hands to pick cotton, and the young and strong were forced into slavery. In the 21st century, which is an information age, the US economy needs persons with extraordinary ability, and the best and brightest are lured with green card visas. Africans who are illiterate or HIV positive are automatically denied American visas.
Do you believe that the brain drain can be reversed?
This is what I'm concerned with. As I always say, brain drain is a complex and multi-dimensional problem that can be reversed into brain gain. India is now reversing its brain drain and turning it into brain gain. I believe Africa can do the same, but unless we reverse it, the dream of an African Renaissance will remain vague.
Why have you lived in the United States for 30 continuous years?
Africa has bitten at my soul since I left. My roots are still in Africa. My house is filled with Africana, food, paintings, music and clothes to remind me of Africa. I long to visit the motherland, but I must confess that when Africa called me to return home, I couldn't answer that call. The reason is that I work on creating new knowledge that could be used to redesign supercomputers. The most powerful supercomputers cost $120 million each, and Nigeria could not afford to buy me one.
Can you tell me what your last word to African governments is?
Finally, I would like to say that millions of high-tech jobs can be performed from Africa, but may instead be lost to India. We must identify the millions of jobs that will be more profitable when transferred from the United States to Africa. Doing so will enable us to create a brain drain from the United States and convert it to a brain gain for Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips, for accepting to do this interview.
My pleasure.